Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today, we would be analyzing the daily edition of the Hindu newspaper of 25th June 2018. Now, let us begin. Now, as you might be aware, that for past couple of days, we have been analyzing the questions that have been asked in the prelims of 2018 and then understanding on how you should be preparing for your civil services examination and how you can utilize the DNS and the Focus magazine in your civil services examination preparation. Now, this question provides 4 different towns that are sometimes mentioned in the news, and these 4 towns are located in 4 different countries, and the question asks which of the pair are correctly matched. Now, to effectively answer this question, you should at least be aware of 3 of the 4 towns, and in terms of the syllabus of your prelims examination, this question would be placed in world geography, and more specifically, physical geography of the world, wherein it has asked as to which town is located in which country. Now you have to understand that these towns have not been randomly asked, wherein there has been a particular event that has been undertaken in these towns, which is of international importance. So if you take one example of the city of Kirkuk, wherein Kirkuk was recently in the news because of the Kurdish referendum in Iraq, wherein the particular relevance of that news was that Iraqi Kurds referred to the city of Kirkuk as their Jerusalem, and the Kurdish Kirkuk region in majority chose independence in a referendum that was held in the Kurdish Iraq. And in similar terms, all other cities such as Aleppo, Mosul, Mazar-e-Sharif also oversaw current events that were of international importance. And therefore, whenever you're analyzing news that are of international importance, always ensure that you have first written down what is that event, important towns or places that are connected to that event, or any associated ethnic group, wherein that event forms a part of your syllabus under the current events of international importance, but the associated town, cities, or the ethnic group might be asked within the section of the world geography, wherein associated town and cities form a part of physical geography of the world, while associated ethnic groups form a part of the social geography of the world. And it is within that context when we covered the Kurdish referendum in the November edition of the Focus magazine and in the Daily News Simplified, we try to aid your understanding with the help of a map, wherein the map shows the location of Kirkuk in Iraq, or the location of Aleppo in Syria, or the town of Mazar-e-Sharif in Afghanistan. And it is with the help of these maps that give you a visual representation that is intended to ease and connect world geography with the understanding of current events of international relations. So it is when you are making notes from the Hindu newspaper or the Indian Express or any other newspaper or magazine, write down the town or the city or the ethnic group of a particular international news that you are making notes upon. So for example, if we take a look at the world page of the Hindu newspaper of 23rd June, you would find a news in which the event, even though it's not of international importance, the city of Mosul has been given. And in similar terms, if you take a look at the world page of 21st June, the Ghouta region of Syria has been mentioned. The city of Hodeidah in Yemen has been mentioned with regards to the Yemen crisis. And therefore, in the similar context, try to find out which region, which ethnic group, or which city or town has been mentioned in the headline of the Hindu newspaper or the Indian Express or any other form of newspaper that you subscribe to. And it is within these similar terms when we provide you information in the Focus magazine or in Daily News Simplified that we try to help you in understanding international news with the help of a map. And it is through this analysis and understanding that DNS and the Focus magazine would help you in the comprehensive preparation for your mains examination in 2018 or the prelims examination of 2019. And so now with this, let us move on to the first article. Now we have taken this article from page 9. Now what we'll do with regards to this article is first understand as to what is responsibility to protect and then understand as to what is humanitarian intervention. And after understanding both of these concepts, we'll try to see as to what has been the focus of this article and then subsequently understand as to which part of the syllabus this article would belong in and why it is important for the preparation for your civil services examination. Now, responsibility to protect was adopted as an international norm or rule at the 2005 UN World Summit. Now, under responsibility to protect, the global community would prevent war crimes, ethnic cleansing, genocide, and crimes against humanity. And under this responsibility to protect, the United Nations has authorized the use of force to the United Nations Security Council. Now hopefully up till here you've understood about what is responsibility to protect. wherein responsibility to protect is an international norm or rule that was adopted at the 2005 UN World Summit, wherein under responsibility to protect, the global community would try to prevent war crimes, ethnic cleansing, genocide, and crimes against humanity. And under this principle, the United Nations has authorized the use of force under responsibility to protect to the United Nations Security Council. Now, humanitarian intervention, wherein humanitarian intervention means that actions have been undertaken by one country or a group of countries to prevent or stop the gross violation of human rights in another country, wherein the third country in which the humanitarian intervention is being undertaken is either incapable or unwilling to protect its own people, or the government of the third country is actively persecuting its own people or a section of its own people. Now, humanitarian intervention differs from responsibility to protect. Now, humanitarian intervention is considered a part of responsibility to protect because actions undertaken under humanitarian intervention is generally of military nature, while actions undertaken under responsibility to protect has a much wider framework of mediation, intervention through supply of food, essential commodities, among other forms. Now, hopefully, you have understood as to what is responsibility to protect and what is meant by humanitarian intervention. Now, according to the author in the article, responsibility to protect and humanitarian intervention have actually subverted or weakened the international order. Wherein the first point, according to the author, is that the recent interventions that have been made by great powers have generally focused on regime change. Wherein the intervention in Libya by the United States, France, and the United Kingdom focused on the regime change of Muammar Gaddafi. And according to the author, the recent interventions by the great powers have not focused on the welfare of the people. And moreover, these interventionist policies of the great powers have actually increased the humanitarian crisis, wherein the intervention of Saudi Arabia and Iran in Yemen have actually increased the humanitarian crisis that is currently engulfing Yemen. The second point given by the author on how responsibility to protect and humanitarian intervention has subverted the international order is that after the intervention has happened, the rebuilding and capacity building of the country in which the intervention has taken place is not effectively undertaken. And because institutional rebuilding and capacity building in that country has not been undertaken, it increases the internal conflicts for power. Wherein, if you see currently in Libya, there is an ongoing conflict between the various tribes in Libya for control of that country. The third point given by the author is that the rivalries between the great powers has made the responsibility to protect, which is a mandate of the United Nations Security Council, ineffective. Wherein during the Syrian conflict, there was a difference of opinion between Russia and China and between the Western powers of United States, France, and the United Kingdom, wherein because of the threat of the use of veto power, the United Nations Security Council was unable to intervene in Syria. Now, the fourth and the final point given by the author in how the responsibility to protect and humanitarian interventions by great powers have subverted the international order is that the great powers have been undertaking intervention through unilateral means and therefore have bypassed the United Nations, wherein Russia intervened in Syria unilaterally and therefore bypassed the United Nations. France, UK, and the US unilaterally intervened in Libya and therefore also bypassed the United Nations. Similarly, Saudi Arabia and Iran have also intervened in Yemen and therefore also have bypassed the United Nations and more specifically the mandate of the United Nations Security Council. And therefore, according to the author, these unilateral actions that have been undertaken by great powers have actually weakened the United Nations and more importantly has weakened the responsibility to protect, which is a mandate of the United Nations Security Council. Now, hopefully, up till here, you understood as to what is responsibility to protect, what is humanitarian intervention, and moreover, you also understand on how, according to the author, the responsibility to protect and humanitarian intervention have subverted the international order. Now, with regards to UPSC syllabus, now this article and the concepts of responsibility to protect and humanitarian intervention and its critique would be placed in GS paper 2 in the section International Relations, and more specifically, it would be placed in effects of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interest, and more specifically, important international institutions such as the United Nations Security Council and their mandate, wherein responsibility to protect forms a mandate of the United Nations Security Council. And secondly, on how the interventions undertaken by great powers such as in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Libya, among others, have affected India's interest. And it is within these two contexts that this article becomes relevant for your civil services examination preparation. Where a question for your practice is critically analyze the role of the United Nations Security Council in the implementation of its mandate of responsibility to protect, wherein you would be able to highlight the 4 points that have been given by the author to answer this question. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken the lead editorial from page 8. Now what this article talks about is that the 2011 census data tried to collect information on caste, and this information was collected for the 2011 census data through the planned below poverty line census, which was later renamed as the socioeconomic caste census. However, according to the author, the hasty inclusion of questions within this caste census has made some of the data unusable. And therefore, according to the author, there is a necessity to include caste census in the upcoming census of 2021. And the author has suggested that it is time to plan about inclusion of caste in the 2021 census data so as to know about the different castes and subcastes and their sizable population. And therefore, by knowing this data, the Government of India can plan accordingly for their welfare. And according to the author, the previous experiences of caste census data has been opposed by various groups and political parties, wherein these various groups and political parties have asserted that a caste census data would divide the country along caste lines. Wherein, according to the author, the first census data of 1871 included questions about caste, and this process of including caste in the census data eventually led to the processes of political representation along caste lines. And therefore, it was after independence that the censuses that were conducted in India shied away or did not include any questions about caste, wherein there was a fear that by including caste in the census data, the processes of political representation along caste lines would further get stronger. Now, the author has asserted that the times have changed and new challenges have emerged, wherein census along caste lines should now be included within the 2021 census data. Wherein, according to the author, the political system, civil society, and courts in India continue to assume broad caste based social categories, which are defined largely from the data that has been used from the 1931 census, wherein it was the 1931 census data that collected data on caste, and the current political system, courts, or civil society continue to use that caste data. And according to the author, the Indian society has gone through several changes since 1931, wherein land fragmentation, decades of agricultural stagnation have turned many upper caste landowners into marginal farmers, while in addition, the rise in rural wages has benefited some of the backward classes. And therefore, according to the author, what is assumed as forward caste or backward caste, their social or economic strength, should now not be based on the data from the 1931 census, and an updated data is required to understand the social and economic status among various caste groups. And apart from this, the author has also asserted that there has been an increased political mobilization for demand and reservation in jobs, and therefore current socio-economic data based on caste is required to understand on how to move forward with regards to reservation in jobs. And finally, according to the author, the time has come to include caste in the 2021 census. Wherein, according to the author, this caste-based census would be a possible solution for the growing demands of reservation for different castes and communities across India, wherein the Government of India would be able to know the socio-economic status of various castes and communities across India and whether they require reservation or not. Wherein, according to the author, an expert group can be set up to assess the data of the socio-economic caste census, and this assessment can be done by evaluating it in combination with the data sources from state-specific scheduled caste and OBC list and other forms of categories, and thereby forming a comprehensive list of caste by using big data analysis. Moreover, the author has also specified that these categories that have been formed based on caste census data can be validated by domain experts based on a given district. And moreover, the author also recommends that the socio-economic caste census data can be prepared by allowing people to self-classify, wherein the person who is being interviewed would classify as to which caste he or she belongs to. Now, with regards to UPSC syllabus, this article and the explanation given in this section would be placed in GS paper 2, more specifically in the governance and the social justice section. Within a question for a practice, the absence of a reliable socio-economic data based on caste has led to the ineffective response to political mobilization for caste-based reservation. Comment. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 11. Now, the reason this article is in the news is because the Union Home Minister Rajnath Singh would be visiting Mongolia. Now, in terms of your UPSC syllabus, it would be placed in GS paper 2 in the international relations section, more specifically India and its neighbourhood, wherein Mongolia is considered as part of India's extended neighbourhood. Now, questions specifically on India-Mongolia relations have not been asked in the recent past in the civil services examination. An India-Mongolia relationship should be seen as India's attempt to build relationship with its extended neighborhood. So what we'll do is try to understand India-Mongolia relationship, which has been covered in the May edition of the Focus magazine. Now, India-Mongolia relationship was covered in the May edition of the Focus magazine. An India-Mongolia relationship had been in the news because Sushma Swaraj, the External Affairs Minister, had attended the India-Mongolia Joint Committee on Cooperation in Mongolia in April of 2018. And in similar terms, the Union Home Minister Rajnath Singh would again be visiting Mongolia. Now, if we take a look at this map, Mongolia is a landlocked country and is currently landlocked between Russia and China. And India and Mongolia follow what is called a third neighbor policy, wherein Mongolia forms a part of India's extended neighborhood, while Mongolia follows a policy of third neighbor. Now, Mongolia considers India as an important third neighbor and considers India as one of the top priorities in its foreign policy. Now, the reason Mongolia considers India a third neighbor and has reaffirmed India as a priority in its foreign policy because Mongolia is concerned by China's rise, wherein China invests heavily in Mongolia, and there is a fear in Mongolia that it would eventually lose its sovereign autonomy due to its dependence on China for connectivity, investment, exports, and other forms which is required to sustain Mongolia's economy and its connection with the outside world. Now, what used to earlier happen is that Mongolia was able to leverage its ties with Russia or China while bargaining with the other. So it means that if Russia failed to respond to Mongolia's need, it would seek China's help. And in similar terms, if China failed to respond to Mongolia's need, it would seek Russia's help. And thereby it was able to leverage its ties with Russia and China for its own self-interest. But what has happened recently is that both Russia and China have become allies, and as a result, Mongolia is unable to leverage their rivalries for its own benefit or national interest. And therefore, Mongolia considers India as a special priority in its foreign policy. And this was further enhanced by the visit of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Mongolia in 2015, wherein the relationship between India and Mongolia was elevated to the level of strategic partnership. And Mongolia considers India as a third neighbor whom it can rely upon if Russia and China are being uncooperative. However, there have been issues of concern between India and Mongolia with regards to China's Buddhist diplomacy and the issue of Dalai Lama. Now, what had happened is China had been establishing influence with Mongol Buddhists or Buddhists in Mongolia in the form of reconstruction of major monasteries, appeasing to the Mongol Buddhist clergy, among other forms of establishing influence. Now, this ability to form influence is part of China's policy to influence Lamistic Buddhism, which has linkages to the Tibetan Dalai Lama. Now, you have to understand that China considers Dalai Lama to be a splittist who intends to split Tibet from China. And what had recently happened is that Dalai Lama visited Mongolia in 2016, and the Dalai Lama has a major influence among the Mongol Buddhists who are part of the Lamistic Buddhism. And therefore, China resented the visit of Dalai Lama to Mongolia and thereby formed an unprecedented economic blockade of Mongolia. And these sanctions by China paralyzed Mongolia's economy. And therefore, Mongolia asked India and Russia for help, but both India and Russia refused to intervene. And in the end, Mongolia had to apologize to China. And further, Mongolia also promised China that the Dalai Lama will no longer be allowed to enter Mongolia. And during this blockade of Mongolia by China, Mongolia had urged India to condemn the blockade. And Mongolia further asked India to fulfill the promise of a $1 billion line of credit that India had promised during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Mongolia in 2015. However, the Indian response to this Mongolian demand was muted. And one of the reasons for India's muted response was due to China's own muted response during the unofficial blockade of Nepal that was conducted by India at India's borders. And therefore, this issue became a sour point in India and Mongolia's relationship. However, during the visit of Sushma Swaraj to Mongolia, Mongolia had reaffirmed India as a top priority in its foreign policy. So now hopefully up till here you understood the basic parameters in India and Mongolia's relationship. And this relationship should be seen as part of India's attempt to increase its engagement with its own extended neighborhood. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 3. Now the reason this article is in the news is because the Airport Authority of India had proposed to set up a water aerodrome in Chilika Lake. And it is through this water aerodrome that the Airport Authority of India wanted to start aircraft operations in Odisha. Now you have to understand that this news is currently in transition, where this proposed water aerodrome in Chilika Lake is yet to have environmental clearance. So we'll have to wait and see on how this news moves forward. But what we'll do with regards to this article is understand about Chilika Lake. Now Chilika Lake comprises of three different ecosystems, which are marine, brackish and freshwater ecosystem. Wherein here the term brackish means slightly salty. Apart from this, Chilika Lake is also a shallow lagoon. Now a lagoon is a body of water which is separated from a larger body of water such as the sea by a narrow strip. Now the location of Chilika Lake is that it is located in the state of Odisha, and in particular the district of Puri, Khurda and Ganjam. Apart from this, Chilika Lake also has islands within it, but one of the main island is Nalaban Island, which is located here in the map. Now this Nalaban Island is notified as a bird sanctuary under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Now the in-source rivers of Chilika Lake is made up of roughly 52 rivers and small rivulets, such as the Daya River. Now the Chilika Lake is the largest lagoon in India. Now as you know, lagoon is a body of water which is separated from a larger body of water such as the sea by a narrow strip. And as you can see here, Chilika Lake is separated from the Bay of Bengal by a narrow strip as shown here in the map. Now apart from this, Chilika Lake is the largest wintering ground for migratory waterfowl in the Indian subcontinent. Now these migratory birds are also protected under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Now Chilika Lake is also a designated Ramsar site, which means Chilika Lake is a wetland of international importance. Now apart from this, Chilika Lake was also included in the Montreux record in 1993. Now the Montreux record is maintained as part of the Ramsar list, and in general terms it means those wetlands of international importance which are threatened. Chilika Lake was removed from the Montreux record in 2002 and became the first site in Asia due to the successful restoration done by the Chilika Development Authority. Now hopefully up till here you have understood that Chilika Lake comprises of marine, brackish and freshwater ecosystem, and that apart from this, Chilika Lake is also a shallow lagoon, meaning that Chilika Lake is a body of water which is separated from the larger body of water, which in this case is the Bay of Bengal, by a narrow strip, and that the Chilika Lake is located in Odisha and in particular the district of Puri, Khurda and Ganjam. Moreover, you also understand that one of the main island in Chilika Lake called Nalaban Island is also a designated bird sanctuary under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. In addition, Chilika Lake is the largest lagoon in India and is also one of the largest wintering ground for migratory waterfowl in the Indian subcontinent. And these migratory birds which flock to the Chilika Lake are also protected under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Apart from this, Chilika Lake is also a designated Ramsar site, which means it is a wetland of international importance and was also briefly placed in the Montreux record as a threatened wetland of international importance. But due to the successful restoration done by the Chilika Development Board, it became the first site in Asia to be removed from the Montreux record in 2002. Now all these facts and features becomes important from the perspective of your UPSC Prelims examination. Now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 13. Now with regards to this article, the first thing that we'll do is first understand as to why this article is in the news. Then we'll understand as to what is AIIB or the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And then finally understand what is NIIF or the National Infrastructure and Investment Fund. So now let us first understand as to why this article is in the news. Now the reason this article is in the news is because the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank has approved a $100 million investment in the National Investment Infrastructure Fund of India. And this decision was taken at the annual meeting of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, wherein this is the first time that India is hosting this annual meeting. Now, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Fund is a multilateral development bank, and presently it has 86 countries as its member, wherein the objective of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is to improve social and economic outcomes in Asia and other countries. And this multilateral development bank began its operation in January of 2016 with its headquarters in Beijing, China. Now, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank has approved roughly around $4.4 billion worth of investment, of which $1.2 billion has been to India, wherein this investment makes India the largest beneficiary so far. And apart from this, India is also the second largest shareholder in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And apart from this, India is also the largest recipient of funds from this multilateral agency. Now, the third aspect of this article is the National Investment Infrastructure Fund. Now, this is a fund that has been created by the Government of India for enhancing infrastructure financing in India. Now, the National Investment Infrastructure Fund was created in 2015 and is seen as a fund of funds, wherein it has the ability to make direct investments as required. And as a form of fund of funds, it may invest in other SEBI registered funds. Now, the main objectives of the National Investment Infrastructure Fund is to maximize economic impact through infrastructure development in commercially viable projects. And apart from this, this fund can also consider other nationally important projects such as in manufacturing. However, the basic criteria for investing in other nationally important projects is to see whether it is commercially viable. Now, hopefully, up till here, you've understood as to why this article is in the news. And apart from this, you also understand the basic features of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the basic features of the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. Wherein, with regards to UPSC syllabus, wherein the Asian Infrastructure Bank would be placed in JS Paper 2 in the International Relations section, and more specifically, important international institutions and their structure and mandate, while the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund would be placed in JS Paper 3 within the section Economic Development and the subsection Investment Models. And now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.